Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hey listeners, it's Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and today is part 2 of a 2-part series on public health and gambling. In this episode, we take a look at what problem gambling looks like and how to treat it. Dr. Chris Welsh is the medical director and director of research, and Will Hinman is the lead supervisor for peer support for the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. They talked to Josh Sharfstein about recognizing and addressing gambling addiction in 2026. If you missed part 1 of this series, we recommend checking it out. It covers the ubiquity of 24/7 gambling and how changing regulation has really upped the ante for addiction potential. Let's listen.
Dr. Chris Welsh, Will Hinman, thank you so much for joining me today here on Public Health on Call to talk about problem gambling. It's Super Bowl season. There's a lot of sports betting going on, and some people who are listening may be worried about someone in their life. And I want to start with you, Will. What does problem gambling look like?
Just very much like substance use, where it starts to interfere with one's life. With gambling, we kind of define a tolerance as it requiring more money and more time to feed the addiction. So it would be someone's inability to control the amount of time and money they spend. We start noticing a lot more preoccupation. It starts interfering with their responsibilities or their daily activities, and they're unable to balance their life with gambling.
Now, you're an addiction psychiatrist, Dr. Welsh. How do you look at it? How do you assess someone for this condition?
Yeah, like Will said, it's very much like other addictions. Unfortunately, unlike other addictions, it's more invisible and silent. There isn't really an equivalent of an overdose or intoxication, which often might be the event that brings someone with a drug or alcohol problem to light with others. This is very much more hidden, and often it's other things going on in someone's life. As you can imagine, if you keep losing money, you're then spending, say, rent, your child's college funds, whatever. People can get very depressed. Suicide, both ideation and actual attempts, are very high with people with gambling problems. So a lot of times it's somebody else who's being impacted, like a spouse or somebody else who's being impacted by the financial difficulties, but also a lot of other mental health, depression, anxiety, other things that are comorbid, but that also just can become overwhelming when you're really going downhill with your gambling.
Got it. So those can be happening alongside the gambling. And Will, what do you recommend people who are worried about someone else in this regard to do?
As a matter of fact, within the last just few days, I've had 2 moms reach out to me for help. One was for a 26-year-old female daughter, and the other was for a 20-year-old son, wondering what they should do. And for the person concerned, the first step really, I think, is arming yourself with resources and educating yourself on this addiction so you have a better understanding, and then offering whatever resources you have to the person you're concerned about in a concerned manner. You don't want to attack them. You don't want to probably go at them while they're in the middle of a game or whatever their game of choice is, whatever they're gambling on. Wait till the right time to have the conversation with them. Let them know you're concerned with behaviors you've observed, and then offer them the resources that you have available for them.
So let's say you break through and the person is ready for help. Chris, could you talk about what happens next?
So again, depends how they've got contacted someone, but at our center here in Maryland, we actually have 5 peer recovery specialists. They're people who've had gambling problem themselves and then are in recovery and doing well. So they can actually, like if somebody called 1-800-GAMBLER, that's a 24/7 number somebody can call, they can get referred to one of these peers who can kind of help them. Here in Maryland, each peer is assigned a region of the state, so they can get connected to them. They can get connected. We also have a list of mental health and addiction treatment providers who have done extra training specifically in gambling addiction, so they can be referred to one of these providers who we have on a list who are looking to help people. There's similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Gamblers Anonymous, there's actually for loved ones, Gam-Anon, another self-help group to help the significant others of the person with the gambling problem. So there are a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, let me ask you, Will. I imagine as the supervisor of the peers at the center, you've probably taken some of those calls.
Yeah, and that's important to note, too, is that I am a person in recovery from a gambling disorder. So I'm a certified peer recovery sports specialist. I cover the southern region of Maryland from Howard County, Prince George's, Charles, Calvert, and St. Mary's County. So when someone calls a 1-800-GAMBLER helpline number, they ask them, would you like to speak to someone in recovery from a gambling disorder, someone with lived experience? And then they warm transfer them to whatever peer covers their region. And at that point, I'm able to have the conversation with them. I'm able to share my lived experience. I sports gambled for over 24 years. I started sports gambling when I was about 19 to 20 years old. So for about 21, 22 years, I sports gambled. Casino gambling was eventually what took me down. Having a casino very close to my home was not good for me. But I gambled in every form. So I'm kind of able to relate on a lot of different levels. And I could tell you, I was an action gambler. So some people don't gamble just to get money. They gamble because they love the effect that it produces on our brain. They did a brain scan of somebody with a gambling disorder and somebody with a cocaine addiction, and they have identical brain scans. It stimulates that same area of our brain, our pleasure center. And I can relate to that because I love the action. I love the effect that it produced on my brain for years. So I'm able to have that conversation with someone if they're ready to have it.
In that first conversation, what's your goal? What are you hoping to accomplish? What kind of connection do you want to make?
That's a great question. So the first thing is, see, what makes gambling a little unique to substance use addiction is sometimes we win. So someone may want to stop gambling, but a lot of times they look at gambling as their only way out of the financial situation they're in. So one of my first challenges is to hopefully convince that person that gambling is not the answer. It's not a financial solution. And sometimes you think you've got them to that point, but once they get their next paycheck, they're back off to the races again. I'm the resource broker. So any resources they may need, like Dr. Welsh said, there's Gamblers Anonymous, there's lots of different support groups available. Like Dr. Welsh said, we have no-cost treatment in Maryland for problem gambling. I can refer them to intensive outpatient treatment, to residential treatment, or just one-on-one counseling and it's free. There's absolutely no strings attached. So whatever their recovery goals are, if they're deep in debt, they have a lot of credit debt, I can connect them with consumer credit counseling so they can consolidate their debts. And then there's harm reduction tools too, such as the voluntary exclusion program. There's gambling website blockers I can introduce them to, such as Gamban or Bet Blocker. So whatever resources, I'm the resource broker. Anything I can provide them with that'll help them on their road to recovery, I'm here to do.
I imagine people must really appreciate that. They're probably experiencing this in isolation, and particularly the family members. But to hear that you're there to help, it must be a pretty intense experience.
What's relieving for them is a lot of times they've never had the conversation with someone with a gambling addiction, or someone in recovery from a gambling addiction. So it's such a relief for them to know that they're not alone, they're not unique, that this is an addiction just like substance use, and that there's help available for it.
So, Dr. Welsh, let's talk a little bit more about treatment. So somebody comes into a treatment program, say it's intensive outpatient, for example. What's your approach to the person? What are your treatment goals?
So first is just finding out what else is going on. As we already mentioned, there's a lot of co-occurring both mental health, but also other, all addictions, especially alcohol, but high rates of opiates, stimulants. So you want to try and figure out, one, what's going on with the gambling, but then what other comorbid mental health and substance issues. If you don't address all of them, they're not likely to do well. So trying to find out what else is going on, trying to get them help for those things. As I mentioned, there are high suicide rates. So you also want to be assessing just for safety, looking at if what else is going on in the family, because a lot of times there's a lot of conflict going on with others who've also been impacted. So helping them get a handle on that. As far as the gambling itself, unfortunately, we don't have any FDA approved medications for gambling. There's some evidence that naltrexone can help some people, but we really don't have any specific medications. So it's really trying to get them in, good therapy, if the mutual help like Gamblers Anonymous, and getting other comorbidities under control really are the main goals.
And how successful is treatment?
Generally very successful. By and large, it seems that people can do as well as they do with other addictions and other mental health conditions.
It seems that there are ads for gambling all over. Does this make it harder for people to overcome this challenge if they're constantly being exposed to it? Well,
Yeah, I hear it all the time in the rooms of recovery. It's a trigger for a lot of people. It doesn't bother me anymore just because I have no desire to gamble. But for some people, that obsession has not been lifted. And to see those ads is very, very triggering. And the other thing it's doing is it's reeling people in. Deposit $5, get $200 in free play, get $300 in free play. They're thinking, why not? I might as well try it. You know what I mean? And it's become so normalized in our society now. I talk to a lot of young people who tell me all their friends are doing it. They almost feel like they're not normal if they're not gambling. So yes, the advertising is making a huge impact in many ways.
does the concept of harm reduction exist for gambling? And if so, what does that look like? Will?
Like for me, the casinos is where I really started gambling over my head. It only takes that one time where we gamble more than we could afford to lose and put cash advances on our credit cards and get deep in debt, But some people, maybe they don't want to be allowed to go in the casino. So there's something they can sign up for called the Voluntary Exclusion Program, which has 5 categories. It's casino gambling, sports gambling, fantasy sports, lottery games, and bingo halls. So say somebody just doesn't want to be allowed to go into the casinos, but they still want to be able to place their sports wagers. They don't feel like sports gambling is out of control. They can choose which activities. Or some people still want to be able to buy their lottery tickets and they don't want to be able to sports gamble. They can choose which they want to do. And sometimes they'll find they can balance those activities. Maybe it was just that one form that got out of control. Other times they might find that they end up jumping addictions and then that other form of gambling gets out of control and then they want to work towards total abstinence. But all we can do is meet them where they're at. You know what I mean? But that's the way I would look at harm reduction with gambling. And like I said, that app allows you to kind of set a limit on the amount of time and the amount of money you want to gamble per day or per week so that you can kind of monitor your goals. So that would be harm reduction for gambling.
Dr. Welsh, anything you want to add to that?
The definition of gambling, it's so broad, it's hard to avoid gambling. It's just everywhere in our society. So we have to have a realistic view that there can't be total abstinence from all gambling from anyone who might have an issue.
Dr. Welsh, one last question for you. Looking ahead, what is in the future for treatment or prevention for this condition?
There are people getting ready to do like psilocybin, psychedelic studies in gambling. The Ozempic is being looked at it now for all addictions. There are actually brain stimulation research for other addictions, and there's some small studies starting to look at that for gambling. But I don't think we can kind of hope that those are going to be a huge answer. So I think we just need to really be working on a lot around prevention, figuring out how to regulate, especially now with the online. It's just so much more, the advertisement's there, but once you get into that, it's just so much harder to get away from it. It's so much more reinforcing. You can in-game bets you can be making and they're instant gratification. It's just a much more addictive form of gambling. So we really need to be working at the local and federal government level on regulations to better control it.
Got it. And in the meantime, encourage people to seek help, to call the helpline, to make a connection to a peer, to get treatment in a program if that's going to be helpful, to get support for themselves and particularly for their loved ones.
And there is harm reduction for gambling too, just like there is substance use. Somebody doesn't want to stop completely. There's even an online self-help app called Avive. It's free for at least a year from the time you download it, where you can set your goals on how much money, how much time, whether you want to work towards total abstinence or a certain amount of time or money. And then you can monitor your goals and see whether you're meeting your goals.
Well, thanks so much to you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Well, thank you for having us.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Rachel Walsh. Audio production by Michael Bonfils, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from J.B. Arbogast, Spencer Greer, and Chip Hickey. Distribution and social media by Rachel Walsh, with support from Nick Moran and Brianna Iacovelli. Follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Public Health Pod for more public health takes and special content. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.